Hello, I hope everyone's having a good day, and we are going to continue reading our Wrinkle in Time. My name is Mrs. Ravarsky. We're reading chapter 1, but we are right in the middle of it, so pages 12 through 28 is what we're going to be reading. And we're going to just go ahead and start with page 12. He said cheerfully, "I've been waiting for you," from under the table where he was lying at Charles Wallace's feet, hoping for a crumb or two. The Fortinbras raised his slender, dark head in meeting to Meg, and his tail thumped against the floor. Fortinbras had arrived on their doorstep, a half-grown puppy. Scrawny and abandoned one winter night, he was Meg's father's dog. He had decided he was part setter and part greyhound. He had a slender, dark beauty about him that was all his own. "Why didn't you come up to the attic?" Meg asked her brother, speaking as though he were at least her own age. "I've been scared stiff. Too windy up there," the little boy said. "I knew you'd be down. I put some milk on the stove for you. It ought to be hot by now." How did Charles Wallace always know about her? How could he always tell? He never knew or seemed to care what Denny or Sandy were thinking. It was his mother's mind and Meg's mind that he probed with frightening accuracy. Was it because people were afraid of him? Was it because people were afraid of him that they whispered about the Murray's youngest child, who was rumored to be not quite bright? I've heard that clever people often have subnormal children. Meg had once overheard the two boys seemed to be very nice, regular children, but that unattractive girl and the baby boy, certainly he wasn't all there. It was true that Charles Wallace seldom spoke when anybody was around. So many people thought he'd never learn to talk. And it was true that he hadn't talked until almost the age of 4. Meg would turn white with fury when people looked at him and clucked, shaking their heads sadly. "Don't worry about Charles Wallace," her father had once told her. Meg remembered it was very clearly, because it was shortly before he had went away. "There's nothing the matter with his mind. He just does things in his own way and on his own time. I don't want him to grow up to be a dummy like me," Meg had said. "Oh, my darling, you're not dumb," her father answered. "You're like Charles Wallace. Your development has to go at its own pace. It just doesn't seem to be the usual pace." "How do you know?" Meg had demanded. "How do you know I'm not dumb? Isn't it just because you love me that you're saying that?" "I love you, but that's not what tells me. Mother and I have given you a number of tests, you know." Yes, that was true. Meg had realized that some of the games her parents played with her were tests of some kind, and that there had been more for her and Charles Wallace than for the twins. "IQ tests, you mean?" "Yes, some of them. Is my IQ okay?" "More than okay." "What is it?" "That I am not going to tell you, but it assures me that both you and Charles Wallace will be able to do pretty much whatever you like when you grow up to be yourselves. You just wait till Charles Wallace starts to talk. You'll see." How right he was about that, though he himself had left before Charles Wallace began to speak, suddenly, with none of the usual baby sentences, using entire sentences. How proud he would have been. "You'd better check the milk," Charles Wallace said to Meg, now his diction clearer and cleaner than that of any 5-year-old. "You don't like it when it gets that skin on top." "You put in more than twice enough milk." Meg peered into the pan. Charles nodded serenely. "I thought Mother might like some." "I might like what?" a voice said, and that was their mother standing in the doorway. "Cocoa," Charles Wallace said. "Would you like a liverwurst and cream cheese sandwich? I'll be happy to make you one." "That would be lovely," Miss Murray said, "but I can make it for myself if you're busy." "No trouble at all." Charles Wallace slid down from his chair and trotted over to the refrigerator, his pajama feet padding softly as a kitten on the floor. "How about you, Meg?" he asked. "Sandwich?" "Yes, please," she said, "but not liverwurst." "Do we have any tomatoes?" Charles Wallace peered into the crisper. "One, Is it all right if I use it on Meg, Mom? To what better use would it be? Mrs. Murray smiled. But not so loud, Charles. That is, unless you want to wake the twins that are downstairs. Let's be exclusive, Charles, Wallace said. That's my new word for today. Impressive, isn't it? Mrs. Murray smiled. Meg, come let me look at your bruise. Meg knelt at her mother's feet. The warmth and light of the kitchen had relaxed her so that her attic fears were gone. The cocoa steamed fragrantly in the saucepan. Geraniums bloomed on the windowsills, and there was a bouquet of tiny white yellow chrysanthemums in the center of the table. The curtains were red with a blue and green pattern and were drawn and seemed to reflect cheerfulness throughout the room. The furnace purred like a great sleepy animal, and the lights glowed with a steady radiance. Outside, alone in the dark, the wind still battered against the house, but the angry power that had frightened Meg while she was alone in the attic was subdued by the familiar comfort of the kitchen. Underneath Miss Murray's chair, the Fortinbras let out a contented sigh. Mrs. Murray gently touched Meg's bruised cheek. Meg looked up at her mother, half in a loving admiration and half in sullen resentment. It was not an advantage to have a mother who was a scientist and a beauty as well. Mrs. Murray's flaming red hair and creamy white skin and violet eyes were with long dark ashes seemed even more spectacular in comparison with Meg's outrageous plainness. Meg's hair had been passable as long as she wore it in tidy braids. When she went into high school, it was cut. Now she and her mother struggled with putting it up, but one side would come out curly and the other side straight, so she looked even plainer than before. You don't know the meaning of moderation, do you, my darling? Mrs. Murray asked. A happy medium is something I wonder if you'll ever learn. That's a nasty bruise that Henderson boy gave you. By the way, shortly after you gone to bed, his mother called up to complain about how badly you had hurt him. I told her that since he's a year older and at least 25 pounds heavier than you, I thought I was the one who ought to be doing the complaining, but she seemed to think it was all your fault. I suppose that depends on how you look at it, Meg said. Usually, no matter what happens, people think it's my fault, even if I have nothing to do with it at all. But I'm sorry I tried to fight him, but it's just been an awful week. I'm full of a bad feeling. Mrs. Murray stroked Meg's shaggy head. Do you know why? I hate being an oddball, Meg said. It's hard on Sandy and Denny, too. I don't know if they really like everybody else. I don't know if they're really like everybody else, or if they're just able to pretend they are. I try to pretend, but it isn't any help, Mom. You're much too straightforward to be able to pretend to be what you are not, Mrs. Murray said. I'm sorry, Meglet. Maybe if your father were here, he would be able to help you, but I don't think I can do anything at all till you've managed to plow through some more time. Then things would be easier for you, but that isn't much help right now, is it? Maybe if I weren't so repulsive looking, maybe if I were pretty like you. Mother's not a bit pretty. She's beautiful, Charles Wallace announced, slicing the liverwurst. Therefore, I bet she was awful at your age. How right you are, Mrs. Murray said. Just give yourself time, Mag. Lettuce on your sandwich, Mother, Charles Wallace asked. No, thanks. He cut the sandwich into sections, put it on a plate, and set it in front of his mother. Yours will be right along in just a minute, Meg. I think I'll ask Miss Whatsit about you. Who's Miss Whatsit? Meg asked. I think I want to be exclusive about her for a while, Charles Wallace said. Onion salt? Yes, please. What's Miss Whatsit stand for? Miss Murray asked. That's her name, Charles Wallace answered. You know the old shingled house back in the woods that the kids won't go near because they say it's haunted? That's where they live. They? Mrs. Whatsit and her two friends. I was out there with the Fortinbras a couple days ago. Remember, the Fortinbras is a dog. Okay, you and the twins were at school. Meg and Meg and I like to take walks in the woods. And suddenly we took off after a squirrel. I took off after him, and we ended up by the haunted house. So I met them by accident, as you might say. But nobody lives there, Meg said. Mrs. Whatsit and her friends do. They're very enjoyable. Why didn't you tell me about it before? Mrs. Murray asked. And you know you're not supposed to go off our property without permission, Charles. I know, Charles said. That's one reason I didn't tell you. I just got rushed off after the Fortinbras, and without thinking, and then I decided, well, I better save them for an emergency now. A fresh gust of wind took the house and shook it, and suddenly the rain began to lash against the windows. I don't think I like this wind, Meg said nervously. We'll lose some shingles off the roof for certain, Miss Murray said, but this house has stood for almost 200 years, and I think it will stand a little longer. Meg, there's been many a high wind up on this hill, but this is a hurricane, Meg wailed. The radio kept saying it was a hurricane. It's October, Miss Murray told her. There have been storms in October before. As Charles Wallace gave Meg her sandwich, the Fortinbras came out from under the table. He gave a long, low growl. They could see the dark fur slowly rising on his back. Meg felt her skin prickle. What's wrong? She asked anxiously. The Fortinbras stared at the door and opened into Mrs. Murray's laboratory, which was in the old stone dairy off the kitchen. Beyond the lab pantry led outdoors, though Miss Murray had done her best to train the family to come into the house through the garage or the front door and not through her lab. But it was the lab door, not the garage door, towards what the Fortinbras was growling. You didn't leave a nasty smelling chemical cooking over the burner, did you, Mother? Charles Wallace asked. Mrs. Murray stood up. No, but I think I'd better go see what's upsetting Fort right now. It's the tramp, otherwise known as another dog. I'm sure it's the tramp, Meg said nervously. What dog? Charles asked. They were saying at the post office this afternoon that a dog stole all Miss Bunnakeby's sheets. We'd better sit on the pillowcases then, Mrs. Murray said lightly. I don't think even a dog would be able to be out on a night like this. But that's probably why he's out, Meg wailed, trying to find a place not to be out. In case, I'll offer him the barn in the morning. Mrs. Murray went briskly to the door. I'll go with you, Meg's voice was a thrill. No, Meg, you stay here with Charles and eat your sandwich. Eat, Meg exclaimed as Mrs. Murray went out through the lab. How does she expect me to eat? Mother can take care of herself, Charles said. Physically, that is. But he sat in his father's chair at the table and his legs kicked at the rugs. Charles Wallace, unlike almost all small children, had the ability to sit still. After a few moments that seemed like forever, Miss Murray came back into the hiding and the door opened. Was it the tramp? It seemed small for Meg's idea for a tramp. The age or the sex was impossible to tell, for it was completely bundled up in clothes. Several scarves in assorted colors were tied around the head, and a man's felt hat perched atop. A shocking pink stole was knotted about rough over her overcoat. Black rubber boots covered the feet. Mrs. What's-it? Charles said suspiciously. What are you doing here? And at this time of night, too. No, don't you be worried, my honey. A voice emerged from among a churned-up coat collar and stole scarves and a hat, and a voice, unoiled gait, but somehow not pleasant. Mrs. What's-it? Says she lost her way. Mrs. Murray said, would you care for some hot chocolate, Miss What's-it? Charmed, I'm sure, Mrs. What's-it answered, taking off the hat and the stole. It isn't so much that I lost my way as that I got blown off course, and when I realized I was at little Charles Wallace's house, and I thought I'd just come in and rest a bit before proceeding on my way. How did you know this was Charles Wallace's house? Meg asked. By the smell. Mrs. What's-it untied a blue and green paisley scarf and a red and yellow flowered print and a gold Liberty print and a red and black bandana all under her. And then she had gray hair, and it was tied in a small but tidy knot on top of her head. Her eyes were bright, her nose round, her soft blob, her mouth puckered like an autumn apple. But lovely, but warm in here, she said. Do sit down, Mrs. Murray indicated at a chair. Would you like a sandwich, Mrs. What's-it? I've had liverwurst and cream cheese. Charles has had bread and jam, and Meg at lettuce and tomato. Now, let me see, Mrs. What's-it pondered. I'm passionately fond of Russian caviar. You peaked, Charles cried indignantly. We're saving that for Mother's birthday, and you can't have any. Mrs. What's-it gave a deep, pathetic sigh. No, said Charles. Now you mustn't give in to her, mother, or I shall be very angry. How about tuna fish salad? All right, Mrs. Whatsit said meekly. I'll fix it, Meg offered, going to the pantry for a can of tuna. For crying out loud, she thought, this old woman comes banging in on us in the middle of the night, and mother takes it as though there weren't anything peculiar about it, and I'll bet she is the one they're calling the dog. I bet she stole all the sheets. And she's certainly no one Charles Wallace ought to be friends with, especially when we won't even talk to ordinary people. I'm only been in the neighborhood a short time. Mrs. Whatsit was saying. Meg switched off the pantry light and came back into the kitchen with the tuna fish. And I didn't think I was going to like the neighbors at all until dear little Charles came over with a dog. Mrs. Whatsit, Charles Wallace demanded severely, why did you take Miss Bunnicky's sheets? Well, I needed them, Charles dear. You must return them at once. But Charles dear, I can't. I've used them. It was very wrong of you, Charles Wallace scolded. If you needed sheets that badly, you should have came and asked me. Mrs. Whatsit shook her head and clucked. You can't spare any sheets, Mrs. Bunnaby can. Meg cut up some celery, mixed it in with the tuna, and after a moment's hesitation, she opened the refrigerator and brought out a jar of sweet little pickles. Though why am I doing it for her? I just don't know, she thought as she cut them up. I don't trust her, not one little bit. Tell your sister I'm all right, Miss Whatsit said to Charles. Tell her my intentions are good. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Charles intoned. My, but isn't he cunning? Mrs. Whatsit beamed at him fondly. It's lucky he has someone to understand him, but I'm afraid he doesn't, Miss Murray said. No, none of us is quite up to Charles, but at least you aren't trying to squash him down. Mrs. Whatsit nodded her head vigorously. You're letting him be himself. Here's your sandwich, Meg said, bringing it to Miss Whatsit. Do you mind if I take off my boots before I eat? Mrs. Whatsit asked, picking up the sandwich nevertheless. Listen. She moved her feet up and down in her boots, and then you could hear the water squelching around. My toes are so damp. The trouble is that these boots are a mite too tight for me, and I might never be able to take them off by myself. I'll help you, Charles offered. Not you. You're not strong enough. I'll help. Mrs. Murray squatted at Miss Whatsit's feet, yanking at one slick boot. When the boot came off, she came off suddenly. Mrs. Murray sat down with a thump. Mrs. Whatsit went tumbling backwards with the chair onto the floor. Sandwich held high in one claw. Water poured out of her boot and ran all over the floor in the big braided rug. Oh, dear me, Mrs. Whatsit said, lying on her back in the overturned chair, her feet in the air and one in red and white striped sock and the other booted. Mrs. Murray got to her feet. Are you all right, Mrs. Whatsit? If you have some ointment, I'll put it on, Mrs. Whatsit said, still supine. I think it's sprained. A little oil of cloves mixed well with garlic is rather good. She took out a large bite of her sandwich. Please do get up, Charles said. I don't like to see you lying there like that. You're carrying things way too far. Have you ever tried to get on your feet with a sprained dignity? But Mrs. Whatsit scrambled up, righted to the chair, and then sat back down on the floor, and the booted foot stuck out in the middle of her, and took another bite. She moved with a great agility for such an old woman. At least Meg was reasonably sure that she was an old woman, and a very old woman at that. Mrs. Whatsit, her mouth full, ordered Mrs. Murray, now pull while I'm already down. Quite calmly, as this old woman and her boots were nothing out of the ordinary. Mrs. Murray pulled until the second boot relinquished the foot. This foot was covered with a blue and gray argyle sock, and Mrs. Whatsit sat there wiggling her toes contentedly, finishing her sandwich before scrambling to her feet. Ah, she said, that's ever so much better, and took both boots and shook them over the sink. My stomach is so full. I'm warm inside and out, and it's time for me to go home. Don't you think you'd better stay till morning, Mrs. Murray asked. Oh, thank you, dearie, but there's so much to do, I just can't waste time sitting around frivoling. It's much too wild a night to travel in. Wild nights are my glory, Mrs. Whatsit said. I just got caught in a downdraft and blown off course. Well, at least till your socks are dry. Wet socks don't bother me. I just don't like the water squishing around in my boots. Now, don't worry about me, lamb. Lamb was not a word. One word ordinarily think of when you're calling to Miss Murray. I shall just sit down for a moment, pop on my boots, and then I'll be on my way. Speaking of pets, by the way, there is such a thing as a tesseract. Mrs. Murray went very white and with one hand reached backward and clutched a chair for support. Her voice trembled. What did you say? Mrs. Whatsit tugged at her second boot. I said, she grunted, shoving her foot down in, that there is such a thing as a tesseract. Her foot went down into the boot, grabbing shawls and scarves and hat, and she hustled out the floor. Mrs. Murray stayed very still, making no one move, and helped the old woman. As the door opened, the Fortinbras streaked in, panting, wet and shiny as a seal. He looked at Mrs. Murray and whined. The door slammed. Mother, what's the matter? Meg cried. What did she say? What is it? The tesseract, Mrs. Murray whispered. What did she mean? How could she have known? Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. So chapter 2 will start on page 28. Have a good day. Be kind.